Hey everyone, it's Wednesday. I'm Benit Brach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here's what's happening this afternoon. Well, BC's Premier is calling on Ottawa to declare India's Lawrence Bishnoi gang a terrorist group. He says this gang has been linked to extortions and other crimes against South Asian community members in BC. EB hopes this will give police more resources to use better tools to investigate. But BC's former public safety minister says a designation change only goes so far.
Well, from a federal level, it may have some application to what is being done. At the ground level, it has very little application that has been done. For example, when we classified Mexican organizations as terrorist group, when in fact it's made no difference at the ground level in dealing with the drug crisis that we're going through and the availability of drug supply here in Canada. Again, identifying, labeling these groups don't necessarily make a difference. Number two is that Lawrence Bishnoi is a thug. Okay, let's face it, we got lots of thugs here in British Columbia. We should be going after these thugs. Listing them as a terrorist group when they're not the only, whether it's a local copycat group that's being involved in it, or it's an organized international gang that's involved in these types of extortions. So what are we going to do? Name 10, 20 of them? I'm sure that's not going to make one iota of difference at the ground level.
He says that governments should prioritize making an independent task force to deal with the extortion and have communication that makes it more comfortable for community members to come forward with any threats. Well, Canada's federal minister says federal public safety minister, says that agencies recommend, if public security agencies recommend EB's request, it can be taken to cabinet. Today also marks the anniversary of the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the Sikh separatist activist who was shot at a Surrey Gurdwara 2 years ago. And shortly after the killing, former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had made allegations that Indian agents were involved in that murder, leading to tension with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, the federal public safety minister was questioned in Ottawa earlier today about ongoing allegations of foreign interference. Take a listen.
We've had difficult conversations with the Indian government, and that will continue. There is no way in which a third country can come into Canada and implement its using proxies, be involved in the murder of a Canadian. And we have expressed our concerns over many months, and we will continue to do so. It is an independent investigation that's been undertaken by the RCMP, and I think we need to wait until they complete that work.
4 men have been arrested and charged in Nijjar's killing. Modi's government has denied any involvement in that case, and there's a rally going on at the consulate here, and also will be prayers in the Surrey Guru Nanak Gurdwara as well today. And Ridge Meadows RCMP says a woman has been killed after she was hit by a vehicle in Pitt Meadows early this morning. The victim was walking on the Lougheed Highway west of Harris Road just after 2:30 a.m. The highway has now reopened, but the RCMP would like to speak to any witnesses or anyone with dashcam video of the impact. Lululemon is cutting about 150 corporate jobs. The Vancouver-based retailer says it's making changes to its organizational structure. So employees that are working in the store support centers, they will be affected by this. Lululemon's shares have plunged almost 29% since the company reported its first quarter earnings. And that's what we have for you so far today. I'm Benit Brach. You're watching CBC News BC. BC Today is coming up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, Canada's Stanley Cup drought continues. The Edmonton Oilers lost their second straight championship face-off with the Florida Panthers last night. How do you feel about 32 years and counting without a Stanley Cup? And what will it take for a Canadian team to bring it home? Plus, BC's condo glut. Sales are dramatically lower this year. Are you in limbo trying to sell a condo in this sluggish market? And if you're a buyer, what's keeping you out of the market right now? That's after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. The Canadian Stanley Cup drought continues.
The rain's going to continue. And now they're knocking on Dynasty's doorstep. The Florida Panthers back-to-back Stanley Cup champions.
Yes, the Florida Panthers back-to-back champions. They beat the Edmonton Oilers 5-1 in Game 6 to take the series. It is the second straight defeat in the final for the Oilers, and that extends Canada's championship drought to 32 years, older than some of our listeners, maybe. Well, the Panthers' Sam Bennett was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy and the playoffs MVP before the team hoisted the cup. Oilers captain Connor McDavid, defenseman Matthias Ekholm, and goalie Stuart Skinner are taking the loss harder.
Lost to a really good team. Nobody quit. Nobody threw the towel in. They're a heck of a team. You know, the Stanley Cup champions back-to-back for a reason.
It's a team thing. It's a team sport. That's what this is. Like, if you don't have everybody firing on all cylinders, it's hard to win a Stanley Cup.
Like, we need to learn from this right away. We need to learn from this right now. Letting it happen 2 times in a row, is devastating.
Those were Edmonton Oilers captain Connor McDavid, defenseman Matthias Ekholm, and goalie Stuart Skinner. They were speaking to press after the loss. Okay, so Canada's 32-year Stanley Cup drought continues, at least for another year. Let us know how you feel about that, and what will it take for a Canadian team to bring the cup home. Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. I have 2 guests joining me for this conversation. Here in studios, Irfaan Gaffar, longtime Canucks beat reporter and co-host of Rink Wide Vancouver. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you. And in Edmonton, Mark Connolly, host of CBC's Edmonton AM morning show. Mark, nice to see you. Thanks so much for being with us. We're having some trouble. I think you might be on mute, Mark.
I was on mute. Sorry, Michelle.
I was going to ask you, you've had a long day already, right? Like, you've been busy.
I've had a lot of commiserating going on today.
A lot. How did you sleep? I know early mornings as a morning show host, but what was sleep last night? What was it like?
Not too bad, because I was actually off this week, the morning show. I was just covering the games. I was on the National last night with Ian Hannamansing, chatting about everything that happened. Yeah. So I wasn't up too late. But it was,
feels.
Tough to take. Yeah, I mean, and just hearing from all my friends. I mean, my phone was blowing up. I'm on about 3 different text chains with Oiler fans that we text each other during the games. High school friends, people at work, and different golf groups. So it's, everybody's pretty bummed about it, and everybody has their own theories. So it's interesting to hear.
Well, I was just listening to our counterpart in Alberta at noon. And let me just play some of the voices of the fans from last night, though, because CBC Edmonton did talk to them. So let's take a listen to some of their voices.
Absolutely tough. It's like watching somebody shoot your dog and you can't do anything about it. It's awful. It's the worst feeling ever.
This is hard, not gonna lie. But we love hockey, we love the Oilers, we are Alberta, and we're proud of who we are. And we came down here for that purpose.
Damn.
It's heartbreaking.
Oh yeah, because you don't get to the finals it's very hard to do, right? To be able to come this far 2 years in a row.
Yeah, I can imagine. And some of those callers to Alberta at noon, because I did listen within the last hour, Mark, they sounded despondent.
Yeah.
What is it like? What is the mood right now?
Well, I think that last year when the Oilers got to the final, I mean, there's been great expectations around Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl over the last few years, but they thought, okay, they could challenge for the cup. They could be contenders. And then when they got to the final last year and they lost the first 3 games, it was desperation. And then they come back and they win 3 games to force a game 7. And it felt like this was a dream. Like, this is like, oh my goodness, look at this. This could happen. It could happen. And it didn't. They lost by 1 goal. So then coming into this season, even though there was a lot of changes toward the end of the year, and when they started rolling in the Stanley Cup playoffs, people thought, well, this is it. This is our year. We deserve this. We should win it. And I think there's almost a lot more people are disconsolate because of that. They just thought, they're going to win. What's the law of averages? We got here last year. We should win this year. How could Florida win 2 in a row?
Yeah.
So
and comfortably
I think it's worse
in the last game anyway. Yeah.
Well, they went to 6 games, right?
That's
so
true.
It's perspective, right? There's only 2 teams in the Stanley Cup final. The other 30 teams in the NHL did not make it this far. The Oilers made it farther than anyone. They lost in 6 games, which the only thing better would be to lose in 7 games, and better than that is to win. So, you're not that far off, but it did feel like, to be honest, that Florida was the better team in almost every area of the game. It really did feel that way to me.
I am hearing that from hardcore Edmonton fans. What about Vancouver fans, Irfaan? What's the perspective from here?
That their team has a lot of work to do to get to this level, to reach the pinnacle, to be on top of the mountain, so to say. You look at the Edmonton Oilers and, the 2 best players in the world, arguably, and they still couldn't win 2 years in a row. So you look at the way that the Florida Panthers were built, obviously some BC flavor on that team with a guy like Sam Reinhart. But I just think for Vancouver fans, I think that they wanted Edmonton to lose, to be honest. I don't think that they wanted another Canadian team to be the team that hoists the Stanley Cup. I think that when you look at it from a perspective of how long it's been, you mentioned the 32 years, anyone pretty much under the age of 40 is not going to remember the Montreal Canadiens winning the Stanley Cup. So that's an entire generation of fan bases. And I don't think fans in Vancouver want Edmonton to be the first team to win the Stanley Cup. And I don't think Ottawa fans want Toronto to be the first team that does it. Everyone wants their own team to do it.
Sure. But, at the same time, we took calls here after the 4 Nations Cup and people were so emotional. So it's like getting behind the Canadian team. Like, is there that sense? I have seen jerseys here among my coworkers.
Oh, no, absolutely. I definitely think when it comes to Canada, this team is all on board. You look at the Canadian men's national soccer team, the women's national soccer team, and both obviously the 4 nations for Canada and other world events. But when it comes to hockey, I think that it is very much so. We own the city, and Vancouver Canuck fans, the ones that are the diehards, and then the ones that go to the games and spend the money, they want their team to win.
Yeah, sure. I can see that. Let's put out the phone numbers once again. We're going to ask you, how do you feel about the 32-year Stanley Cup drought continuing? Irfaan is right. You may not even really remember, have experienced ever a Stanley Cup win by a Canadian team. So let us know how you feel about that if you're a Canucks fan. Or were you cheering for the Oilers? I know people who were here in Vancouver. And let us know what you think it would take for a Canadian team to bring the cup home. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. Or you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm very glad to have as my guests Irfaan Gaffar, longtime Canucks beat reporter and co-host of Rink Wide Vancouver. And in Edmonton, Mark Connolly, host of CBC's Edmonton AM morning show, who took the week off because of the playoffs. I'm totally guessing there. We have an email here. AJ writes, what the Canadian team needs is more toughness. And if Edmonton would have had a better goalie, they would have had a chance. I'm a huge hockey fan. The Florida Panthers have no state tax, so the players would love to stay there. And so the Canadian teams are at a disadvantage. AJ, thank you very much. I think you touched on 2 different points there. So let's get into the sort of play analysis. Your thoughts on the toughness of the Oilers, Mark.
I think that the Oilers' 3rd and 4th lines were not good enough. I don't know about toughness. I don't know. I would say more grittiness. Like when you think about toughness, maybe you think about fighting and that kind of thing. But I think it was more of a grittiness, the ability to dig in and hold the other team accountable. They had a lot of hits in the games. They just weren't able to smother the other team like Florida was able to smother their defense. They weren't able to get in and forecheck. Goaltending, Bobrovsky arguably is the best goaltender in the world, at least in the top three, maybe behind Hellebuck in Winnipeg. The Oilers, obviously, Stuart Skinner is not among the top even 10 goalies in the league, to be honest. Now, he's had some really good games, and he's a hometown guy, and I would love to see him play much better than he has, but he did not play. You look at his numbers, and it's just there for everyone to see.
Yeah.
So that could have made a difference, but I really think that Florida, as I said, was better in almost every respect, and the Oilers did have their chances. I think if they would have won Game 2 in that overtime game, that they would have had a great chance to win the series. So things can go on this edge. Things happen really quickly and you think, oh, they were dominated. But, this was a close series, went to 6 games.
Yeah.
It wasn't like it was 4 straight.
Right.
But it just felt because in those games that Florida won, besides the overtime ones, they were dominant and there was a big score, a big disadvantage to the Oilers.
Pardon me, sorry to jump in there. I watched that double overtime game, and the stress level of watching that game was too much to handle. What about you, Irfaan? Is it about the grit, the goalie? What was lacking for you?
For the Edmonton Oilers,
Yeah.
a lot of it. I think that when you look at, we'll start with the goalie. Not good enough. I think that when the Edmonton Oilers definitely go through their exit meetings, so to say, and speak to their players about what they need, they're all going to say goalie. I think there were some errors defensively that were made the other night. Connor McDavid, for as good as he has been his entire career, in this Cup final, wasn't the Connor McDavid that we're used to seeing. Leon Draisaitl obviously wasn't the Leon Draisaitl that we're used to seeing night in and night out when it comes to that. And obviously, you mentioned the role players. Yeah, the third and fourth lines weren't good enough. And collectively, when you have a team that's as good and is built as good as the way that the Florida Panthers were, it's going to be difficult. Sergei Bobrovsky, absolutely. A couple Stanley Cups, a couple Vezina trophies for the guy. He's probably on his way to the Hockey Hall of Fame at some point. But it's just the way that the team was built, and then the fact that the Florida Panthers seemingly got better every single round leading up to the Stanley Cup final, and they were playing their best hockey for the last 6 games.
I want to ask
That's often something that I would say, Irfaan, about teams, that you have to get better series by series through the playoffs, because no team is ready to win the Stanley Cup in that first round. And remember, the Oilers lost their first 2 games to Los Angeles. Then they roared back with Calvin Pickard, their backup, winning 6 in a row. He gets injured. Stuart Skinner comes in and plays really well against Vegas and then against Dallas. So he's looking really good coming into the final. And the Oilers are getting better and better and looking stronger and stronger. Then they come up against Florida. And there's a couple of comments made after the game that I thought really spoke to what Florida's all about. And one was from Stu Skinner, where he said, every day, every game, you look at Florida and they're exactly the same. Whether they lost by 6 goals or 1 goal or an overtime or they won the night before, they come into that game and they're exactly the same as they were before. They're not up and down. They're not back and forth. They're not this. They're not that. They're exactly what you expect every time. And that consistency was really what got them the win against the Oilers, I think.
Yeah. Let's take some calls now. Eddie is on the line in Vancouver. Yeah, your thoughts on the drought, the Stanley Cup drought continuing for Canada, Eddie?
Oh, geez, painful for so many Canadians. But I have 3 quick points. Number one, I think both teams played their hearts out. It's a hard black puck of rubber that bounces around. There's so many unknowns that happen. For sure, Florida was a much better team, and, hats off to them. Number 2, I think that all Canadians would be happy if Edmonton won. There's probably a small majority of people that are so diehard about their own team that they would feel bad about a Canadian team winning after all these years. And lastly, I'd like to call it the Gary Bettman curse, because it was clear, when Gary took over, his mission was to, increase viewership and make the game more popular in America, and he's been successful at that. And, I would really love to see a Canadian team win, and we just have to keep plugging away.
Plugging away. Eddie, thank you very much for the call. You want to jump in, Irfaan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some definitely valuable points there. I'm not entirely sure Gary Bettman was on the ice for the Oilers, helping them not win the game the other night. But that it is the job as a commissioner, and I can definitely feel the angst of some Canadians that feel that. But Canada's had opportunities. The Toronto Maple Leafs haven't been there, and the Winnipeg Jets haven't been there since '93. Every other Canadian team has been to the Cup final. They've all had the chances. The Vancouver Canucks here, we all know what happened. They were Game 7 Stanley Cup final. The Oilers last year, Game 7 Stanley Cup final. The Calgary Flames, Ottawa Senators, they've all done it. So they've all got to the pinnacle, but they weren't able to reach the mountaintop.
Yeah.
And even if you think about the numbers, as Irfaan talks about, there's 32 teams in the league. There are 7 Canadian teams. It's been 32 years since Canadian team won, and they've been to the final 8 times. So in some ways, Canadian teams have overperformed just slightly, but it's pretty much even as where they should. Just not having won in those 8 times, you would think the law of averages would be that one of those teams would win.
Yeah, but if you don't have the cup, how much does that matter? I suppose, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's take a call.
To the players, a lot.
To the players, absolutely. Ralph in Powell River. Hi. Do you have a favorite Canadian team? Were you rooting for the Oilers?
I was. The thing is that I moved from Montreal, Quebec to Powell River, British Columbia about 8-9 years ago. And my favorite team at that time was the Montreal Canadiens. They were a dynasty a few years ago, which is obviously one of the reasons that I loved watching them play. And when I came to Powell River, I switched to the Vancouver Canucks, hoping that they would become a team that would be in contention, but they never did. And this year, seeing that we didn't have the Montreal Canadiens or the Vancouver Canucks playing in the finals, I was hoping that any Canadian team would win. To me, it didn't matter which team it was, even though there are a few Canadian teams that I really dislike, but I wouldn't have cared if they would have won.
Ralph, I love hearing from you. Thank you very much. How does that feel, Mark, that people were getting behind the Oilers in Vancouver?
It's awesome. A little close to Vancouver. I think that I think there's a bit of a McDavid factor there in that because he's, arguably the best player in the world. He's Canadian. He's going to lead Team Canada. He did at Four Nations, and he will next year at the Olympics. Some people have a love for the Oilers because he's involved in that sort of thing. But there's lots of partisan people who, obviously Irfaan said, a lot of Canuck fans, there's no way they're going to cheer for the Oilers. And Calgary fans, unlikely.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that because we have an email from James who writes, maybe you could ask Mark why Calgary Flames fans hate the Oilers so much and would be rooting for the Panthers. As Canadians, it's very petty.
Well, Calgarians are very petty, so that's just all there is to it. There's a great rivalry between the two cities, goes beyond hockey, but from a hockey perspective, Calgary had very good teams in the 1980s, and the only time they ever got to the Stanley Cup and won it is when the Oilers got knocked out in an upset. So the Oilers would beat them every year, and they wouldn't, and they obviously only won one Stanley Cup, Calgary, in their history because of that. And so there's a big rivalry. I was covering the Oilers in 2006. I was in Carolina. My kids were younger here. They were watching. Actually, no, this was the year before when Calgary was actually playing, and I was away doing some coverage of something, and they were watching the Stanley Cup final. And my wife said to them, "Are you cheering for Calgary?" And they looked at her like, "Mom, ABC, anybody but Calgary."
Oh no!
So as children, they learn that lesson.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting you say that because just to counter that part, in Vancouver in 2011, it was anyone but Vancouver if you weren't from these parts. Vancouver became this team that was filled with all these characters and personalities that rub people the wrong way. So as the Vancouver fans, there's a lot. There's a lot of people that, didn't like the Vancouver Canucks and didn't want them to win in 2011. So this notion that, there's so many people around the country that are cheering for the Edmonton Oilers because Connor McDavid's such a good guy. I don't know if I buy it completely.
Well, let's talk about, I'm going to read an email and then let's talk about attracting players like Connor McDavid, keeping them in Canada. But here's an email from RJ who writes, give full credit to the Oilers for getting there 2 years in a row, but they don't have a truly tier 1 goalie. There you go, Mark. All Stanley Cup winners have had a goalie ranked top 5 in the league. Interesting to note, both teams in the finals have 10 or more Canadians on the roster. See, this is the thing too. Let me I only have 2 minutes left, but Mark, I'll ask you both. Yeah. So what's it going to take? Is there speculation that McDavid, is he going to stay or go next year? What are your thoughts, Mark?
Well, he has the opportunity to sign a long-term deal with the Oilers. He's under contract for next season. His extension would kick in the year after that, and he'll likely get top dollar, right? He'll be paid the most in the NHL by far. It probably around $16 million. He could get up to 18, but that would sort of maybe hamstring the Oilers as far as getting other players. The Oilers need to attract, obviously, other players. The consensus here that he will sign in Edmonton, that there's not much advantage to him going somewhere else. He still has a really great shot at winning Stanley Cups here with Leon Draisaitl beside him, but they do need to get a number 1 goalie, someone who is tops in the league, and that could make all the difference.
Yeah. Irfaan, your thoughts on keeping a talent like McDavid?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's dollars and cents for the most part. You mentioned 16 million, upwards of probably 17. He's going to be the highest paid player in the history of the National Hockey League, and rightfully so. He's definitely earned it with all his accolades and hardware that he's won, is obviously except for the Stanley Cup. But I think the biggest thing for Connor McDavid is, am I going to take a little bit less? How much do I really want to be in Edmonton? And in 3 years from now, 4 years from now, how many more times am I going to get to the Stanley Cup final? So can I build a team around me is the biggest question, or can they build a team around me?
Listen, it's been great to have you both. Thank you so much. I hope you get some sleep, get some rest, Mark.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. It's always good to talk to Canucks fans.
Great to have you both. Mark Connolly, host of the CBC Edmonton radio morning program, and Irfaan Gaffar is a sports journalist, co-host of Rink Wide Vancouver.
Thank you.
Now, shouldering the weight of the Oilers' loss is team coach Chris Knobloch. Speaking to the press after the game, he indicated his hopes weren't high for the Oilers' chances at next year's Stanley Cup final.
No, there's no silver lining to this. It's still heart-wrenching. It's very difficult to handle right now. No, it's just because we were maybe the underdogs going to the LA series, underdogs against Vegas, Dallas series. It hurts right now, and I don't think it's going to let up for a while.
Given the way this ended, does it feel further away than maybe it did last year?
Well, yeah, it feels farther away. We went to Game 7 last year. I certainly felt things could have been a lot differently. We were probably overall healthier last year as a whole, but we had everyone in the lineup. This year, obviously, missing Hyman was a big hole for us.
All right, so lots of emails coming as well, and we have this one email that says, why does everyone say McDavid and Draisaitl are the best players in the world when guys like, Vancouver's own Sam Reinhart get 4 goals in the game? Okay, well, thank you very much for that email and that reminder, too. Scott writes from Burnaby, everyone's talking about the Stanley Cup Game 6, but the best game last night wasn't on the ice. It was on the pitch at BC Place. Canada's men's national team put on a clinic in a 6-0 Gold Cup win over Honduras right here in Vancouver. Yes, we have a lot of sports to enjoy right now, don't we? Thank you, Scott. Again, it's BC Today at cbc.ca. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, live streaming as well on CBC News BC and on YouTube at CBC British Columbia. And coming up, we're actually going to be live on TikTok as well. So you can join us for that conversation as we talk about the condo market in BC and asking you if you're in limbo trying to sell a condo unit or if you're someone who's been looking to buy, asking you what's keeping you out of the market right now. We're going to have that conversation coming up after the CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Evacuation orders placed on properties near the Kiskatna River wildfire in BC's northeast have now been lifted. The Peace River Regional District says residents have been cleared to go home, but it issued an evacuation alert for some properties that may still be threatened. The district is encouraging people to remain prepared to leave should conditions change. Police are investigating a suspicious death in Port Alberni. Investigators say the victim was found Monday in Dry Creek Park and showed signs of injuries. RCMP are working with the coroner service to determine the circumstances of the death. And the BC Highway Patrol says a 22-year-old man is dead after a hit and run on Highway 97 near Oliver. The man was struck Sunday afternoon near Cassini Cellars Winery. The Mounties say the driver fled the area and the pedestrian was pronounced dead at the scene. And now the forecast on the north coast, mainly cloudy this afternoon with a high of 16. Highs around 20 with showers and a chance of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a chance of showers with a high of 18. Highs getting close to 30 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a high of 25 with some sunshine and a chance of thunderstorms. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, a bit of sunshine in some areas this afternoon. A chance of thunderstorms as well, with highs around 19. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Did you watch the final last night?
I sort of flipped through it.
Yeah.
After the start, it didn't look good.
No, yes, it was kind of they won handily. A nice email here from George, who writes, thanks for the discussion. While Edmonton fans are disappointed, it's important to remember that coming in second is a huge accomplishment. Doing it twice is exceptional. I hope they get past the disappointment and are able to celebrate despite not winning the cup. So there you go. There is still something to celebrate. It's hard to get even get to that point.
I don't know if they're going to feel too good about being coming in second.
Listening to them, they certainly don't.
No.
But there's a reminder that there is success in there. Anyway.
Sure.
Rob, thank you very much.
You bet.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. 12:33 now, and lots more on the day's top stories on afternoon shows in your region and on the coast. Here's Jason D'Souza.
Hello, Michelle Elliott. It's Jason D'Souza here. Coming up this afternoon on the coast, Big Sisters of BC and the Lower Mainland is celebrating its 65th anniversary. We are going to meet the CEO and talk about the mentorship that the group offers and inclusion, innovation, and opportunity. Just a little taste of the BC Lieutenant Governor's 3 themes to guide her mandate. She will be our guest this afternoon on the coast. Tune in from 3 to 6.
Jason, thank you very much. That's Jason D'Souza, who is hosting On the Coast in Metro Vancouver. Yep, he took a ferry over. He took a ferry over from hosting All Points West in Victoria. And Steve wrote us about the Stanley Cup. Don't look at the jerseys, look at the players, because there are Canadians in Florida. Florida brings home the cup to Canada with a team full of Canadian players. Thanks for that reminder, Steve. BC Today at cbc.ca. $12:34 now. You're with BC Today, and I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about condos now because demand has slowed down. Unsold units are sitting empty, and there's a shift in BC's housing market. This week, the BC Real Estate Association put out its latest update, and it says overall, home sales in May were 26% below the 10-year average for that month. You think that brings conditions more toward a buyer's market, but still, first-time home buyers don't seem to be coming forward. We're asking you, are you in limbo right now with a condo you're trying to sell? How long has it been, and what are your options? As a potential buyer, what's keeping you out of the housing market right now? Our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And our email as well is bctoday@cbc.ca. And I have 2 guests in studio with me for this conversation. Bryan is Assistant Vice President and Chief Economist at Central One Credit Union. And Hasan Juma is a real estate advisor representing Oakwyn Realty. Welcome to you both. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
we had this discussion with you about a month ago, Hasan, looking at the slowdown in the condo market. So what do these May numbers from the BC Real Estate Association say to you?
Yeah, so in terms of sales quantity, when we're looking at condos, significantly down. We're down, on the condo side specifically, anywhere from 18 to 20%. If we look at it over the last couple of years, down almost 40% sales quantity wise. So it's no secret the condo market is struggling both on the resale side and the pre-sale side. Prices not necessarily as aggressively coming down just yet, but that does tend to follow prices down a few percentage points. So just a lot of supply in the market, and that's kind of driving, lower sales activity. And the lag in prices following suit. That's right. And Bryan, for yourself, looking at the broader sort of BC economy, what do the real estate numbers and the drop in sales mean for the economy as a whole?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is actually just partly a reflection of the economy. I think there's a lot of uncertainty around what we've seen over the past few months with the Trump administration and the impact on the economy, risk of job loss. I think that's pretty impactful when it comes to a market like Vancouver, where it is such a high-priced market, and affordability is very challenging for most potential buyers. So when we looked at where we were, even in the back part of 2024, we had seen some momentum. Lower interest rates were helping to drive some of that sales flow, but really, I think a lot of that has just dropped out this year, and a lot of those buyers, even if they can potentially make those purchases, are sitting on the sidelines until things are a bit more certain.
Because of the tariffs and the U.S. tariffs and Donald Trump's implementing tariffs. And so, it's interesting because anecdotally I've heard from people who say, I just don't know what's going to happen with the economy, so I'm going to hold off, even though they may have been looking already. So when it comes to the interest rate in Canada, it's been held. That was the latest decision from the Bank of Canada. Do you think that there's an argument to be made to continue to lower the interest rate in the face of a slowing real estate market?
Yeah, so the Bank of Canada is kind of in a really challenging position. They're balancing the risks around inflation, which we know it's still trending around 3% on a core basis. Also, recognizing that the economy will likely slow, although it's been pretty resilient thus far, at least in terms of the numbers. Our view is that they will ultimately cut. We have them going down to about 2.25% now in terms of their policy rate. That should put a little bit of downward pressure, at least on those mortgage rates. But even then, bond yields have been remaining pretty elevated, and that's kind of keeping it up. So for a lot of buyers, yes, we probably will see some easing in terms of those rates, but it may not be a huge incentive for them to buy at this point.
Okay, we're asking our audience as well, if you are someone who's been looking to buy, have you found that there's not much of an incentive right now for you? And if you are someone who bought pre-construction or someone who has a condo right now you're trying to resell, tell us about your situation. How long have you been, how long has your unit been on the market for? What are your options right now? I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And what do you think is needed in BC to get things moving along? You can comment on TikTok as well. We are live on TikTok right now, so thanks for joining us there. Put your comment in the chat, and we'll include it in our conversation here. My guests are the Chief Economist at Central One Credit Union, Bryan Yu, and Hasan Juma, Real Estate Advisor representing Oakwyn Realty. We have a TikTok comment here. Moonbean writes, I don't want a condo because I want a yard for my kids to play in. My dog likes to run. I enjoy gardening. Yeah, that's a really good point. Here we are, Hasan, with the breadth of single room, people call it a shoebox. Were those ever going to be useful as units that people actually live in rather than just invest in? Yeah, so I think from the investment angle, it made a lot of sense because we had a rental market that was picking up steam, rental rates going up. We had high levels of immigration, so we had a lot of people that would actually utilize these as a home for themselves as individuals. But that's a great comment because
for families or for people that have dogs or they need the yard. We saw a lot of this during pandemic where people were moving out of areas like downtown, moving towards the valley, trying to get some additional space and get some room. So, that thought process has been around a while, but different strokes for different folks. I will say that there are a lot of buyers that just want to be in a specific location with everything they need around them, amenities wise. And so sometimes the smaller condos, it may work because they're spending less time in the condo, more time, out and about in the community, right in their neighborhood.
What do you think this means for choices that developers need to be making, Bryan?
For developers, when we look at the number of condos that are kind of sitting empty right now, there's a lot of them, over 2,500 units in the Lower Mainland. Probably a lot of those are those smaller units. And reality was when they were developed, when they were planned, that fit the market as well, whether it was for the investment cycle, but also for young buyers as well. And over time, though, I think a lot of us learn is that sometimes you need more space. And what's happening is that that challenges means that a lot of people may not be looking for these types of units at this point, given the immigration cycle, given just the normal demographic moves of individuals as they build out families. So for developers, it is a question of trying to find ways to make things affordable. It's looking for yards and maybe just more common spaces, but again, having units that kind of meets today's market, but also potential for future market. And that could mean a lot of things around flexible use of space. And I kind of talked a little bit before about, how can we make the existing space we have more flexible of walls or size? Can we create layouts that are more amenable?
And developers seem to be trying to adapt or adjust. I know there's one developer that has a high-rise in Surrey where they're actually allowing, letting buyers, come back if they change their mind, come back and sell it the unit back to the developers at the original price. Yep. I mean, what do you make of that?
I think it's an example of the developer realizing the risk that presale buyers take in this market, understanding that if they want to sell these units, they're going to have to take some of the risk. They're going to have to take the risk from the purchaser to get them involved. So I think it's creative. We're seeing a lot more creative type options out there. We're starting to see one-day sales on condos from developers. Rental options as well for when it completes. We can guarantee some rent for you. So it makes sense. I like to see it. I think this market needs creativity. I think risk needs to be shared between both the buyer and the developer as well.
Lots of comments coming in on TikTok. Miss Lish writes, I think in 5 years, the market will be much different. Hopeful about Mark Carney's housing plan. Felicia Gomez writes, 1 bedroom for 6 years. I won't be working harder and be away from the kids more to pay for it. Okay, it sounds like, trying to sell a unit, a 1-bedroom unit there. Thank you very much. Or rather, 1-bedroom unit, that's still on the market right now. Thanks so much for watching us on TikTok. Darren is on the line in Kelowna. Hi, Darren. Thanks for calling in.
Hello there. Thank you.
Yeah. Have you been thinking about getting into the market?
I have been. I've been looking for the last 2 to 3 years, and I get online and I look each evening and just kind of keep an eye on how things are progressing. But for me, and probably many like me, it comes down to just 2 things, and one is the fixed mortgage rate specifically. Until it drops below 4%, it just eats up far too much of our monthly income. And then the other is just simply the top price. I mean, since the pandemic, we have seen gains of 200,000 to 300,000 across almost any house or any condo, and it's just demoralizing to see that. Wow, 4 years ago I could have maybe got into this at 250, and now I'm looking at $500,000 for a 1 to 2 bedroom type of a condo, and these are used. These aren't brand new.
Right.
So you know you're going to get into having to drop at least 50, maybe 1,000 to upgrade flooring and paint and the whole thing.
Yeah, you're in Kelowna where demand certainly rose amid the pandemic.
It's true, for sure. Yeah. And so, we talk about creativity and different options, but it just comes down to our monthly price is killing us, and the overall price is just far too high.
think you've touched on what so many would-be buyers have been feeling there, and thank you so much for bringing that to the conversation. Sheena is on the line now in Kamloops. Hi, Sheena. Your thoughts on the real estate market? And what's it like for buyers? What's it like for sellers right now?
I'm just have an idea that nobody's really talking about. I haven't heard anybody bring it up yet, and it's the short-term rental thing going on in BC right now. I have a home in Kamloops, and I have a little Airbnb in my space that was just shut down, like just overnight kind of thing. And for a lot of friends that I know, like they've had condos that they are going to go into the city and use Airbnb it while they're not in town. And they've had to sell those condos now because they can't afford it as just to have a rec property sitting there, right, without some additional income coming in.
And long-term rent is not an option.
No, long-term rent's not an option because it's a rec property. Like they might say they live on the Sunshine Coast and they want to go into Vancouver and go for a hockey game and, you know, rent their place out occasionally here and there, make a little bit of extra money. Yeah. Tons of people have been doing that in BC, and it's.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that was, it certainly was an issue for the provincial government. And so they have implemented these rules restricting Airbnb or short-term rentals to your primary residence on your property. How much of an impact has that made on people who have bought, on people who are thinking of buying, Hasan?
Yeah, I think Sheena brings up a really good point because there are properties across the province that have been designed for short-term rentals, recreational properties, smaller condos, stratified hotel type units. There's several on the Victoria side. And so these owners have been really put into a tough position because of the new legislation. People don't want to long-term rent these properties. And so, there's been a lot of, I would say, issues and coming up from the short-term rental legislation. We have seen rental rates now come down. I wouldn't attribute it specifically to that, but it plays a part. Everything plays a part, and I think the province now has said that over time they may look to revise some of this legislation if that rental market continues to stabilize. But it's been a factor for sure.
It's a really interesting point to make, very pertinent to this discussion, Sheena. Thank you very much. And so, Bryan, what kind of shift are we looking at then if these regulations stay in place? Because the goal is to create more long-term rent to address the rental crisis in BC.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges from the legislation in itself. A lot of the demand that kind of comes in to drive new construction as well is investment. There is absolutely investment components, an important part of the overall market. It helps developers get to the stage that they can actually build new product with the anticipation that some of those units will be investments, some of them might be sold off, but ultimately it helps to drive that actual construction. So, without some of that investment cycle, we don't get the build to house people who want long-term housing and home ownership housing as well. One other component around the short-term rentals, especially in some of the markets across the province, is that it takes away, or at least it takes away potential housing for tourists as well. So we ultimately have this kind of a shock in certain markets, let's say in the interior, in the Okanagan, where there are just not enough hotel rooms available, or it increases the pricing for hotels as well. So again, there's some of these additional shocks that are outside the housing market that we do have to look at when we think about legislation around demand.
Okay. We have some emails coming in too, asking you, in light of the slowdown in the condo market specifically, we have some latest numbers now for the month of May from the BC Real Estate Association, seeing that overall home sales in May in BC were 26% below the 10-year average for that month. So we're asking you, are you in limbo right now with a condo that you're trying to sell, whether it is a pre-sale or a resale, or if you're someone who's been thinking about buying, what is keeping you still out of the market? We heard a great call from Kelowna just now. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. We are also reachable by email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And if you're watching us on TikTok, you can certainly comment. Lots of comments on TikTok right now. Felicia Gomez writes, we would love a 2-bed, 2-bath for the 4 of us, but I can't make $600,000 make sense, or move farther out and lose the family and friends, the kids' friends, the school. Yeah, that's interesting. And someone else responding to Felicia saying, yeah, same here, paying $1,350 for less than 400 square feet. Wow, no room to grow, no chance of bigger. And that's from Moonbeam. And someone else Moonbeam now writes, oh, wow, we bought older to get the size of 700 square feet. I don't think I could do 400 or 800 for 2-bed, 2 baths. Daisy and Bear writes on TikTok, the maintenance fees plus the property taxes. And then there are bylaws that restrict pet ownership. So that's what's keeping them out of buying a home right now. Leah writes, good renters would pay more in rent than they would for a mortgage, yet lenders won't approve them. Okay, thank you so much for joining our conversation on this. Our number is again 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Sandy wrote an email in the short term, condo prices are set by what buyers think it will be worth later. In the long term, however, prices are set by what buyers can actually afford, including fluctuations in interest rates, unemployment levels, cost of living, etc. I'm frankly baffled at the huge sums buyers have been willing to borrow under the assumption that the value will keep rising forever. Okay, Sandy, thank you very much. Hasan, what kind of discrepancy are we seeing between what people paid for and what prices are right now? Yeah, so, I would say that the people that purchased a few years ago, they were thinking they were going to buy a pre-sale, prices were going to go up. Not happening out there. Prices are lower, appraisals are coming in lower. So these are buyers that purchased based on what they believed a future value would be. So that's not coming to fruition. I would say like the resale buyer, so let's say first-time home buyer, I think they are concerned about where that value will be in the future, but I think they're more concerned that the value doesn't drop off a cliff in the next 6 months, right? They buy today and prices continue to go down. I think that's what they're more worried for, because they are making purchase decisions based on their lifestyle, their family, they're getting married, they're having kids, they have to do this. But what I'm finding is they're saying, do we do it today or do we wait another month? There's gonna be more supply, prices will be lower. Do we wait 6 months? So it's FOMO, but it's like opposite FOMO, where you're not a fear of missing out what's today. Yeah. You're fear of what's missing out tomorrow. Right. What advice do you give people right now? Like if they were kind of stuck for a few months with pre-sale? Yeah. So on the pre-sale, we have to find a way to close it. Is number one. So sometimes if that means you have to get alternative lending, which is not amazing, right? The rates are going to be higher. You have to find a way to close it. And what I do with my clients is before we even buy, I say, are you going to be able to complete this? Because I need to be able to sleep at night. And if someone comes to me and says, I'm buying this, I don't really have a means to complete, I'll flip it later. I'll say, see you later. Because I can't, that's not something that I want to take on. But you have to close on it, and then we come up with a plan. Are you going to rent it for a certain period of time? Maybe you try and sell it after it completes, because people will generally pay more for a property they can touch and feel and inspect. But tricky market all around. Yeah, that goes to what the comment was earlier. I can't believe how much people are willing to put up. Bungee, loving these. You're really good at handling these TikTok comments, I'm telling you. I'm trying to stay on top of it. You're doing great. Bungee writes, the rent is too damn high. Things are way too expensive for housing. Expecting everything to go up is destroying our planet astronomically. Housing should be a right, not a means to make money off of the backs of other people. More supply. Thank you so much for weighing in on that on TikTok. I'm going to go now back to the callers, and Sheena is joining us from Victoria. Hi, Sheena. Welcome.
Hi. So a comment to the other Sheena in Kelowna. Mm-hmm. The government had better not change the regulations. They finally did something right. Short-term rental, Airbnb, that sort of thing should just never have been allowed to become a de facto hotel system. Rental properties if you want to do the original purpose of Airbnb, which is just to rent out a room in your place, the place where you live occasionally, fine. But it cannot become an investment system because people need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
And essentially, the price of all housing is much, much, much too high. It all has to come down. Somebody is going to lose out at some point and maybe, lose some money or at the most break even. But people have to be able to afford somewhere to live.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sheena. Thank you so much. Yeah, going back to
just one more thing.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. One more thing. At this point, all housing that needs to be built needs to be public housing because there is no way to build the amount of housing necessary to bring prices down. So it should all be government-owned public housing, but in the way it is in Europe, which is not that it's
Sheena,
that it's for troubled people, it's for everybody.
Thank you so much for the call, Sheena. And so why don't we look at that? She's saying making the argument for keeping those short-term rental regulations. But Bryan, perhaps you can not look into your crystal ball, but tell us a bit about what we're looking at in the future here.
Yeah, well, I think when we look at where we are now, there's a short-term period in which the pricing environment is probably going to weaken a little further. We have absolutely excess supply in the market for whether it's condo buildings, in general, resale inventory right now. So that's going to put some downward pressure, I think, on prices in the short term. But we have to remember that even with that, we had a period of massive increases during the pandemic period. So prices are pretty sticky on the way down. So we're kind of, I think, easing off some of those numbers. And we still have a real challenge that we will likely still see population growth over the future. We had a lot of population growth during the pandemic. Yes, we're going to see that slow down now, but that's still there. We still have rental markets which are still pretty tight across the province. Yes, they're easing, but again, these are tight numbers historically. And so there is still that demand there. We're still going to see some challenges of supply, and that's going to be made worse by the fact that we're not going to be building as much.
For construction, the challenges of construction there as well. Really good to have you both for this discussion. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bryan, you is the Assistant Vice President and Chief Economist at Central One Credit Union, and Hasan Juma, Real Estate Advisor representing Oakwyn Realty. Lots of comments on TikTok. Trigaro writes, real estate process needs overhaul. No visibility into competing offers. Commission rates are high. Swamp Donkey writes, I agree, Airbnb helped ruin the market. And Zoe writes, if we don't buy, guys, the prices keep coming down. They don't want us to FOMO. Thanks for your comments and watching us on TikTok.